Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha, starting a brand new book that's titled Exploring the Path to Enlightenment. This is volume 4 of our book series, where we're going to be exploring chapters 1 through 10 today, and we're doing this in a study group fashion, as opposed to the way I normally teach, which is a more traditional method of teaching. We're going to have a volunteer to offer to read a chapter. Then after someone reads the chapter, I will share some teachings on that for a few minutes, and then I'll open up to any questions that you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions by putting those into the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. So if there's anybody who would like to read the first chapter, you're more than welcome to volunteer by just raising your hand, and then I'll be able to call on you, and you can read the chapter, and then we'll go and progress from there. Looks like Samantha has her hand up. Go ahead, ma'am. And then Pat, it looks like you'll be next.
A small amount of existence is not praiseworthy. Monks, just as even a small amount of feces is foul-smelling, so too I do not praise even a small amount of existence, even for a mere finger snap. Monks, just as even a small amount of urine is foul-smelling, a small amount of saliva is foul-smelling. A small amount of pus is foul-smelling. A small amount of blood is foul-smelling. So too, I do not praise even a small amount of existence, even for a mere finger snap.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this discourse is understood through understanding the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha and what he's teaching you, that the ultimate goal is to get to enlightenment, and by purifying the mind, eliminating craving, desire, attachment, and all the other pollutions, this is what's going to lead the mind to this enlightened mental state. And having done so, not only will you not experience any discontentedness any longer and all those other qualities that I talk about with enlightenment, but you won't experience rebirth, because anytime there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And that's why the Buddha is saying he doesn't admire or he doesn't praise existence, because as long as there's existence, as long as there's a birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. Of course, when you get to enlightenment, you've eliminated the sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, but you can't eliminate sickness, aging, and death as long as you're in this existence. No matter how enlightened you are, you will always experience some degree of sickness, some degree of aging, and you'll experience death. Although once you actually experience enlightenment, we don't refer to it as death, we refer to it as final enlightenment. So this is why the Buddha is saying he doesn't praise it, because it means you're going to experience these experiences of sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And this is a really helpful discourse for anybody who's maybe been exposed to teachings where people share with you that the goal of the teachings of the Buddha is to postpone your enlightenment, not get to enlightenment, and come back into the world and help other people to get to enlightenment. You can see this is completely untrue, because the Buddha doesn't say that. And that's not what the Buddha did, and that's not what he's actually teaching either. So if you've ever been exposed to that kind of teaching, it's not actually true, because that's kind of like trying to teach someone how to drive a car, but yet you've never actually driven a car before. How could somebody guide people to enlightenment if they're not actually enlightened themselves? So the idea of postponing your enlightenment in order to be able to help other people get to enlightenment, Well, you haven't even figured out how to get to enlightenment yourself. How could you figure out and how could you help and guide others to enlightenment? So this is a key discourse to be able to help you understand that the Buddha is not teaching people to come back into the world over and over and over again, but instead to train your mind to be able to get to enlightenment and escape the entire cycle of rebirth. Because being born into the world means you're going to experience these complications of sickness, aging, and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. It's just going to keep coming about over and over and over and over again. But there is an escape, and that's the Eightfold Path. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll go down to the next chapter, which is chapter 2. And it looks like Pat's volunteering for that one. Go ahead, sir.
One who is engaged is unliberated. One who is disengaged is liberated. Monks, one who is engaged is unliberated. One who is disengaged is liberated. Consciousness, monks, while standing, might stand engaged with form. Based upon form, established upon form, with the sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with feeling. Based upon feeling, established upon feeling, with the sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with perception. Based upon perception, established upon perception, with the sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Or consciousness, while standing, might stand engaged with volitional formations. Based upon volitional formations, established upon volitional formations, with a sprinkling of excitement, it might come to growth, increase, and expansion. Monks, someone might say, separated from form, separated from feeling, separated from perception, separated from volitional formations, I will make known the coming and going of consciousness, its passing away and rebirth, its growth, increase, and expansion is impossible. Monks, if a monk has abandoned desire for the form aggregate, with the abandoning of craving, the basis is cut off. There is no support for the establishing of consciousness. If he has abandoned desire for the feeling aggregate, for the perception aggregate, for the volitional formations aggregate, for the consciousness aggregate, with the abandoning of craving, the basis is cut off. There is no support for the establishing of consciousness. When that consciousness is unestablished, not coming to growth, non-generative, the mind is liberated. By being liberated, the mind is steady. By being steady, the mind is content. By being content, one is not agitated. Being unagitated, one personally attains nibbana. One understands, destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of existence.
Thank you, sir. So this is a discourse that an individual would need to understand the 5 aggregates, and they would need to understand what being unliberated and liberated is, and then also what clinging is, because the Buddha is talking about these different things here, as well as talking about the cycle of rebirth and enlightenment itself. So first, let's talk about liberated and unliberated. If someone's mind is unliberated, that means it's bound up, it's still polluted, and that means that it's still experiencing discontent feelings, that the mind is not free, because that liberated means that the mind is free. It's free of strong feelings. That if somebody says something to you in a certain way, if your mind is liberated, it doesn't matter. Your mind isn't experiencing strong feelings. But being unliberated, meaning unfree, that means that somebody could just say something simple and your mind could get agitated or annoyed or frustrated. That's why it's not free. And instead of the word clinging, the Buddha is using the word engaged. That one who is clinging is unliberated. One who is non-clinging is liberated. And he's talking about the five aggregates here of form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. And we've talked about these at different times in this program, so I think you guys know what they are, but I'll just kind of give a little bit of a refresh, and then you guys can ask questions if you need more input. There's the form aggregate, which is the physical form. This is all living beings are going to have these five aggregates or five collections or five criteria or five elements, that they're going to have physical form. They're going to have feelings, which is pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. They're going to have perceptions, which are views and opinions about the world. Then they're going to have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. So every living being is going to have free will. And then there's going to be a consciousness, which is the actual mind. And what the Buddha is saying here is one who is engaged is unliberated, and one who is disengaged is liberated. And what he's talking about is clinging or being engaged with any of these five aggregates. So the mind, monks, while standing, might cling to the physical form. And now when it's clinging to the physical form, there might be this excitement as a result. That if you feel like, I'm so youthful, I'm so beautiful, I'm so handsome, wow, look at me, my hair looks so good today. This is like clinging to the physical form. And now there's this excitement, this sprinkling of excitement because of the clinging to the physical form. And what the Buddha is saying is this clinging or this engagement can grow, increase, and expand. And now the mind's going to continue to get more and more discontent related to that. And then there's the feelings, where the mind can cling to the actual feelings, like I am angry, or I am frustrated, or I am happy. This is that I am. That whenever you're clinging to the feelings, this is the mind identifying with those feelings. Then there's the perceptions, the views and opinions. You might cling to those. And now, if somebody disagrees with your views and opinions, you might feel like you need to fight or argue or advocate for people to agree with you. And this causes difficulties in relationships. And then you might have clinging to volitional formations or choices and decisions. You could make a certain choice or decision, and then as time goes on, if you're clinging to this choice and decision, even though updated information has come in, you might not make a better decision or a new decision that would be more wise because the mind is clinging to a certain decision. And then what the Buddha is saying is, okay, if someone says that they're separated from the five aggregates, and they're going to make known the coming and going of consciousness, meaning they're going to make known the cycle of rebirth, that they've separated themselves from these five aggregates, and now they've become aware and they've gained the wisdom of this cycle of rebirth. And the Buddha is saying that's impossible, that you can't just separate yourself from these five aggregates and then become aware of the cycle of rebirth, because the mind hasn't actually eliminated its clinging or its engagement or its longing, yearning, its desire. It's through abandoning your clinging or abandoning the desire of holding on to these five aggregates that one then comes to understand that this consciousness is continuing to be in the cycle of rebirth. And that's where one can then understand the cycle of rebirth as they've eliminated clinging to the five aggregates. Because by that time, the mind will be very peaceful and very joyful. You will have understood dependent origination, and you would see these 12 interlinking steps. And when you dismantle this, which part of that is to eliminate clinging to the five aggregates, you will know that the mind is liberated. And now with the mind being liberated, it'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, your mind will be peaceful, it'll be calm, it'll be serene and content with joy. And because your mind has done that, you will know that there's no more discontentedness in the mind, but there's also not going to be any more rebirth because there's no support for the continuing establishment of consciousness. That the craving, desire, attachments that lead to discontentedness, that's the same thing that leads to rebirth. And when you extinguish those cravings, you extinguish that fire, not only will you eliminate the discontentedness, but you're eliminating the causes and conditions that is producing the next life or the next consciousness that then finds a new body. So the Buddha is saying you need to actually completely abandon desire and clinging and holding on. This is realizing non-self. That Typically in the foundational programs, I talk about realizing non-self as eliminating the clinging to the form and eliminating clinging to the consciousness, that you don't cling to this self-image and you don't cling to the self-identity. But the mind can also cling to feelings, it can cling to your perceptions or your volitional formations and identify yourself through these things. For example, if in the past you've made decisions to use drugs or alcohol, and now in the present moment, in your mind you think, I am an alcoholic or I am an addict. This is the mind identifying with it being a certain type of person based on decisions that you've made. And now in the present moment, you could feel guilty or you could feel shameful for the decisions that you might have made in the past, where you can just understand, hey, I made decisions in the past to use drugs and alcohol, but that doesn't define who I am as a person. I'm not an addict. I'm not a alcoholic. Yes, this being chose to use those substances in the past, but you're no longer choosing to do those things. So you don't have to identify who you are as a person through the choices and decisions that you've made. And this is where you can completely let go of any clinging to the physical form, to the feelings, to the perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. Even the I am angry, that's not really true reality. True reality is that the mind is experiencing anger. Or I am annoyed. This isn't actually true. It's the mind is experiencing annoyment. That's what's really going on. So the more that you can see this clearly, then you can learn to not identify with these things, that they are impermanent and that you don't need to cling to them. Because if you cling to them and identify who you are as a person through any of these aggregates, then there's going to be discontentedness. And if there's discontentedness, then there's going to be rebirth. So then the Buddha ultimately gets to this regular kind of statements that you see on many of his discourses, where he says, by being liberated, the mind is steady. So essentially, when your mind is enlightened, when it's completely liberated of its pollutions, it's no longer polluted, then the mind is steady, right? It's stable, it's content. Now, being content, the mind is not agitated. And being unagitated, one personally attains nibbana. So one of the things that you'll hear in the world is some people say that describing enlightenment is impossible, that it's not possible to describe enlightenment. And that is true for somebody who's not experiencing enlightenment. They won't be able to describe enlightenment. And some people will go as far as saying that the Buddha never described enlightenment. Well, here's a very concise little description, and the Buddha talks about it in more detail than this, where he's describing enlightenment. He's saying that the mind is steady, it's content, and it's not agitated. Right? So anytime you hear somebody say that enlightenment is indescribable, or that the Buddha never described enlightenment, you can see that that's not true, that it's here. And you've heard plenty of descriptions from me about what enlightenment is. And having gotten to enlightenment, where the mind is liberated and it's free of all those pollutions, you will understand from having trained your mind and having seen the wisdom of dependent origination that not only have you eliminated discontentedness, but you've eliminated the causes and conditions that lead to rebirth. And that's why he's saying destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. You've done the training. You've done what you had to do. Here in this world, you've cultivated the wisdom that you need about the natural laws of existence, and now you're gone. You can escape, right? Where if you don't have the wisdom of this world, if you don't have the wisdom of these natural laws, you're going to need to keep coming back over and over and over again until you cultivate that wisdom. And that's what we have been doing in the past. But now, if you've gotten to enlightenment and the mind is liberated, what had to be done has been done. You've trained your mind. And now there's no more for this state of existence. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Vibhav has a question, and Marcy as well. So go ahead, Vibhav.
Thank you, David. I think my question is kind of related to the first chapter. These two seem to me connected. I guess that's why they have chapter 1 and 2 here. But you took the example of people who wanted to come back to this world out of compassion for other, being like the bodhisattvas. It seems they might be attached to the idea of being compassionate or working for the liberation of others, that is kind of described here. So they're attached to the form or the consciousness that kind of attaches themselves to the identity of being compassionate or being working for the other people to liberate them. That is why they're still yearning for existence.
Yeah, they're still stuck in the cycle of rebirth because they're clinging to form. They're clinging to their perceptions, which are their views and opinions about the world. They're clinging to their decisions, their volitional formations. This is where they think that they're taking a vow to not get to enlightenment and to come back into the world over and over. And yeah, they're clinging to their consciousness too. And you can see that this isn't actually true. It's not possible. It would be so unwise to choose to come back into the world, because no matter what you're doing in the world, there's no guarantee that you're coming back to the human realm. You could come back to the hell realm, the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, and who are you helping there? You're not helping anybody. So this whole idea of having compassion for the world and not getting to enlightenment in order to help others, while it sounds very nice, really, in my opinion, what this is allowing the mind to stay complacent. That it's like, hey, I'm not going to do the work to get to enlightenment here. I'm going to just kind of guide other people to do that work. Well, how could you ever guide other people to do the work if you haven't done it yourself? You don't even know what work there is to do in order to get to enlightenment. So this is just very misunderstood. And if this was actually true, that this was actually what was happening, then that's what the Buddha would have did. And if this was actually true, then we would see the world progressively getting better and better and better, because we would see more and more compassionate beings coming back into the world. And essentially what we've got is not that. And also what you tend to understand when you think about this whole analogy that everybody's supposed to take this vow in order to come back into the world and help others, it's kind of like everybody's holding the door, but nobody's walking through the door. Who's walking through the door if everybody's holding the door, right? So it's just really a lot of delusion and lack of wisdom to be able to think in this way. And it's not what the Buddha taught.
And also, I guess when you come back, even if you come back to human existence, by the time you realize that you, at least a lot of cases you see, a lot of times you realize that you have to walk this path of, trying to be enlightened or be compassionate. You're already gone through so much discontentment, and you're a lot of cases you have like half the life is lived already before you realize it. That you still have to go through all the discontentment in your human life before you even get to that path. So
yeah, it's just
it doesn't seem
it's fraught with it. It's fraught with errors, and it's just really unfortunate that people don't study his original words, because you see how simple it is. That last discourse was like 2 or 3 sentences. It's right there and clear as day in the original teachings, but people just don't study with them. And it's unfortunate, because those people who are choosing to do that, they're just going to keep coming back into the world over and over and over again, and they're most likely not coming back into the human world.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Mercy, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. So I have been lately, my dreams have been about past volitional formations, and I am having a wonder are these mental objects, or is the mind taking time to reflect? Because what ends up happening is, instead of the choice that originally was made in the dream, I make better choices and I handle it a better way. So is the mind having a mental object, or is the mind reflecting during sleep? Is even that possible?
Yeah, it's the latter. But let's talk about mental objects for a moment. In most situations where you see the word mental object being used, this is referring to the pollutions or the taints or the fetters. It's usually being referred to in an unwholesome way, that these mental objects are unwholesome. But you'll occasionally see the Buddha using the word mental object, or at least what we're translating as mental object, in reference to wholesome things, even like loving kindness and compassion. We could call that a mental object as well. And then even rarer, but you'll see this occasionally, that he uses the term mental object for even thoughts and ideas. But most frequently, it's being used as describing the fetters, the taints, the pollutions, these unwholesome qualities. So that's what a mental object is, a deeply rooted container in the mind. And usually we're talking about it as an unwholesome thing and pollution, and this needs to be uprooted and eliminated out of the mind. But also, we could easily describe loving kindness and compassion in that way, sympathetic joy, equanimity, these kinds of things, these mental qualities as mental objects, but then occasionally you'll see the thoughts and ideas referred to that way. What's happening for you is that what we do is when we're making our way to enlightenment, our life almost goes backwards from the time that we start practicing these teachings. At that point, there's been a whole bunch of things that we've been doing throughout our life that we've just been burying and burying and burying. We've been suppressing, and we haven't really dealt with those situations very well in the past because we didn't have the wisdom and the tools and techniques to be able to deal with them. So we usually just bury them. And then as we start training our mind, it's kind of like pulling back the carpet and the dust starts flying. But now we have the tools to be able to deal with these things in a different way. So we start kind of reliving experiences from the past, sometimes very, very long in the past, even from childhood, like 4 years old, 6 years old, 8 years old, and we start reliving those things. But we look at them now in a different way, and we look at them with this wisdom from the Eightfold Path. And then, like what you're experiencing, it just so happens to be in your dream that you cultivate wisdom of how to deal with this situation in a better way. So that should that situation ever occur again, you have now the wisdom on board to be able to handle that situation in a better way than you did previously. And what you'll end up noticing is that your life will kind of almost go backwards, that you'll start experiencing these things quite a bit again.
Thank you, Teacher David. And I have one more question. I've also experienced moments now in my daily life where I will be doing a specific task and instantaneously I hear myself say, "You're daydreaming, let it go." And it's not with an effort. It's not with an effort. It's just I'm working on something, whether it be typing up a note for one of my clients, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, that's a daydream, let it go. And then I go back. But it happens, it's not like I control it. Is that something normal?
Yeah, by the time you fully cultivate the 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you're catching things really early, like a bodily sensation, or really early as a thought, your mind will just automatically cut off and let go. It's like just its normal response. Where before you would just kind of be complacent, or you lacked wisdom, and the thought would come into the mind, and you would ruminate over it. You would become agitated and annoyed, and maybe your conduct would become unskillful. Now you're wise to all of that, and you know that if you allow this thought to continue, it's going to lead to unwholesome results or unwholesome karma. So the mind has wised up. It's become wise, and it just takes action. This is that virus scanner that I talk about that's just kind of there looking at the mind. That's your mindfulness. That's just kind of observing the mind at all times. And then whenever like a virus hits your hard drive, the virus scanner goes into action, quarantines it, cleans it up, kicks it out off the hard drive, and then it's just kind of sitting there monitoring again. And it's the same thing that your mindfulness does, because the mind becomes so wise. It's practicing this mindfulness and looking over the mind, protecting the mind, and then it just becomes automatic and it's almost effortless. And when this is occurring, you'll know that you're actually getting close to enlightenment. Enlightenment could potentially be within 1 to 3 years away if your mind continues to function this way, because it's very effortlessly cutting off and letting go. And this is what you would ultimately like to get to. And eventually, when you cut off and let go enough, nothing will arise. That it'll be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and you won't even notice anything unwholesome or any cravings or any discontentedness even arising, because you've cut it off and let it go so many times. So it does become effortless once you've kind of worked through the challenges and the struggles of cultivating the wisdom, training the mind in meditation, regularly and actively cutting off. Eventually it gets to be almost automatic. It just does it without you even thinking about it.
And last question, teacher. When would a person know that their subconscious and conscious mind have become that one? Like, would you stop having, is it the moment when your mind stops having to say, hey, you're daydreaming, cut it off? It just does it? Is that when oneness of the mind has been attained?
Normally, when you experience oneness of mind, it can be sometimes all of a sudden. It can be like a sudden shift in your consciousness where you just go from, being in the first jhana to, whoa, now you have this full clarity of the entire mind and you can see the pollution in your mind in a significant way. And sometimes people have a lot of guilt and shame around this time because they see how polluted their mind is. They can oftentimes cry and sob a lot during this time. Some people refer to this as the third eye opening up, or the divine eye, or the inward looking eye. And the result of all of this is now you'll be able to see the entire mind, that there's not going to be like these kind of erroneous thoughts that are unwholesome that just pop up into the mind. You will still have unwholesome thoughts when your mind is in the second, third, fourth jhana, and even in the stages of enlightenment. You'll have unwholesome thoughts until you get to the fourth stage of enlightenment. But you won't have these deeply troubling thoughts because you will have cleared out a lot of those things. But when you get to that second jhana where you have oneness of mind, you'll have full awareness of the mind. There's ability to be able to see the entire mind. There's nothing kind of hiding in the corners, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Teacher David.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, we have a question from someone here on YouTube. I'm not recognizing the name. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. Is that Yanix? So good to see you, David. I just came out of the Vipassana course in Wat Ram Pyong. I'm still in Chiang Mai and looking forward to catching up in person. Charlotte. Oh, hi, Charlotte. Yeah, you're welcome to come by the temple. I'm going to be teaching now all the way through to next Sunday. So you're more than welcome to come through. I'm going to be teaching starting at 9 a.m. each day. And next week, we're starting a course called Experiencing the Jhanas and the Four Stages of Enlightenment. You're welcome to attend. Jose is saying, hi, David. One question. Is it normal to feel like you don't have interest in anything or any activity with your friends or family? This is normal as you're training your mind, but this isn't normal by the time your mind is fully trained. That what you're going to notice is that in the unenlightened state, the mind is chasing cravings and it's holding on and it's go, 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 go. And you're getting all this pleasure from getting your cravings fulfilled. But then when your cravings are not fulfilled, you're going to get angry or frustrated or agitated or annoyed. But when you start letting that go through training the mind with breathing mindfulness meditation and all these other factors of the Eightfold Path, your mind starts letting go of craving. And some of those cravings and attachments are the things that you're holding on to with your family. When you start letting those go, the mind doesn't just go to the middle and get peaceful. It actually overshoots the middle and it goes all the way over to the other side where you kind of can feel lethargic, you can feel complacent, you can feel dull, you can experience these kinds of things where you just feel completely disinterested in any aspect of life. That's because the mind is not yet in the middle. You need to be able to bring in the enlightenment factors of investigation, energy, and joy. This is in volume 1, chapter 3. You're going to need to study those enlightenment factors and understand how to continue to investigate the teachings, how to arise this energy, this willingness to do something, this initiative, this enthusiasm and ambition, and this joy, this unconditioned gladness. Because by the time you get to the middle, you'll be able to do things with your family and be perfectly happy and perfectly content, but you'll also be able to let them go out on their own and you stay at home and be alone and you'll perfectly content with that too. But I know what you're experiencing because I went through that where I kind of like withdrew from the world for a while. This is where I apologize for bringing up Jesus, but Jesus went to the desert for 40 days. And there's other people like Prophet Muhammad did the same thing. He went into a cave for a while. And the Buddha went away from society for 4 years, right? And the mind kind of retreats and kind of contracts on itself. And this is normal for someone who's on the journey, but it's not normal for someone who's enlightened or close to it. That their mind is going to have ambition, enthusiasm, they're going to have vigor, they're going to have an interest to go out and do things and spend time with people around them. them. But you might go through this period where you do kind of withdraw a little bit. And that's because the mind has overshot the middle and went over here to the other side. So now you'd like to bring the mind back closer to the middle, but you're probably going to overshoot that too. And you're probably going to go back towards craving, but just not as much as you were before. You'll go a little bit less. And now it's like a pendulum. It'll swing over there and then it'll swing back and swing, 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 and then you'll kind of get to the middle. So you're going to need to kind of pay attention to the mind, use the 7 factors of enlightenment to fine-tune the mind. And you need to know all the 7 factors of enlightenment, but the ones that I just mentioned are the ones that'll bring it out of that complacency, that lack of interest and motivation to do things. Okay, so I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 3. Looks like Marcy's volunteering for that one. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. One dwelling with craving as a partner. Venerable Sir, in what way is one dwelling with a partner? There are Mijijala forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk seeks excitement in them, welcomes them, and remains holding to them, excitement arises. When there is excitement, there is obsession of mind. When there is obsession of mind, there is bondage. Bound by the fetter of sensual desire, Mijijala, a monk is called one dwelling with a partner. There are Mijijala sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk seeks excitement in them, he is called one dwelling with a partner. Majjala, even though a monk who dwells thus resorts to forests and groves, to remote lodgings where there are few sounds and little noise, occupied, hidden from people, appropriate for seclusion, he is still called one dwelling with a partner. For what reason? Because craving is his partner, and he has not abandoned it. Therefore, he is called one dwelling with a partner. Venerable Sir, in what way is one a lone dweller? There are Mijjala forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, excitement is eliminated. There is no excitement, there is no obsession of the mind, there is no obsession of mind, there is no bondage. Released from the fetter of sensual desire, Mijjala, a monk is called a lone dweller. There are Mijjala sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, he is called a lone dweller. Majjala, even though a monk who dwells thus lives in the vicinity of a village, associated with male and female ordained practitioners, with male and female household practitioners, with kings and royal ministers, with sectarian teachers and their disciples, he is still called a lone dweller. For what reason? Because craving is his partner, and he has abandoned it. Therefore, he is called a lone dweller.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here the Buddha is describing how essentially craving is this partner. He also describes it as a burden in other discourses. It's like a real burden to carry around these cravings because the mind is longing, yearning, and chasing after its pleasant feelings. It's wanting those pleasant feelings, and it thinks if I can just get this thing, then I'll get what I want, and I can indulge in those pleasant feelings. Remember, these are conditioned feelings. That's why he's saying if a monk seeks excitement in them, welcomes them, and remains holding on to them, excitement arises. This is conditional excitement. It's going to arise, it's going to change, and it's going to fade away. And if you allow the mind to do that, then the painful feelings are going to come right after that, right? Because at some point, that condition is going to change. Whatever you were getting excited about, the condition is going to change, and your mind's going to end up in the painful feelings. So if you get so excited because your mom's coming to visit you, and she tells you on Tuesday she's going to come visit you, well, on Friday when she calls you and she says that she can't come because her plans has changed, then you're going to be frustrated, you're going to be sad, you're going to be annoyed, because you allowed your mind to get conditional excitement, where based on the condition that mom's coming, I will be excited. But that's not permanent. Even if mom comes, you'll have a great time with her, but then when she leaves, you'll feel lonely and bored. It'll be like, no, mom, don't leave, right? So what the Buddha is saying is that when there's excitement in the mind is obsessed, right? That's the craving, desire, attachment. When there's obsession, there's bondage. The mind is bound up. So with this fetter of central desire, the mind is bound up, that this is the partner. This is what you're essentially having to satisfy. It's kind of like having this, kind of this monster on your shoulder, and you have to feed this monster of craving because you have to keep chasing around. You have to buy this thing. You have to go to this place. You have to do this thing. You just have to keep fulfilling all these cravings. And this is where you get exhausted at the end of your day if you're fulfilling your cravings, and your cravings are either getting fulfilled or not getting fulfilled. If you're going around the world chasing cravings, you'll just get utterly exhausted. And the Buddha is describing that through the 6 sense bases: the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. That's what the mind is longing, yearning through. Because it's when you experience contact through the 6 sense bases that those cravings, desires, attachments are getting triggered or fulfilled. And now you're going to get those pleasant feelings or the painful feelings or the neither painful nor pleasant feelings. But when you've abandoned craving, desire, attachment, that's where one is now a lone dweller, that you don't have this burden of carrying around this craving, desire, attachment anymore. That when something is happening, say mom calls and says, hey, I'm going to come visit you on Friday. Are you going to be around? It's like, sweet, mom, it'll be good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. That would be outstanding. It'd be lovely to see you, right? You can interact this way with people, but you don't allow your mind to get the conditioned pleasant feeling. You'll be able to distinguish this when you develop your mindfulness. The difference between just being like, oh, that'll be wonderful. It'd be wonderful to see you. That'll be a lot of fun. You can experience that, but not have the conditional excitement in the mind. You're going to need to be able to observe this conditional excitement. The mind will pick up and it'll be getting really excited. But you can have this enthusiasm and this interest to do things. And this is where the mind won't seek excitement in some kind of object that is coming through the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, or the mind itself. And having eliminated these conditional pleasant feelings, then the mind is not obsessed. It's not bound up. And now you're a lone dweller because you're not having to feed this monster that's sitting on your shoulder wanting you to chase after all these things. You can be completely at ease. So that's what the Buddha is talking about here. Let me know what questions you guys have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, Mayuli has a question here on Facebook. The mind has been very heightened and noticed bombardment of thoughts, random thoughts, and even tightened scalp. Perhaps due to the exhaustion of all the thoughts or the exhaustion of controlling the thoughts. Is this normal? Have you ever experienced this in the past? Yes. The more you guys ask questions, the more I see that the teachings are working and you guys are headed in exactly the right direction. There's so many students right now that are experiencing so much improvement because I've been teaching now for a few years, and there's a lot of students who are really deeply practicing the teachings. And what you guys are experiencing is how the mind and the physical body is going through these changes. That when you're training this mind, this non-tangible, non-physical thing, it has an effect to the brain, which is the actual organ. And as the brain is starting to change, there's going to be physiological changes in the body. And you guys are experiencing these. Like Jose was talking about feeling like withdrawn from his family. This is normal because the mind's not yet in the middle. Mayuli, what you're talking about, this is normal, where you're just having this bombardment of thoughts and your mind is just constantly trying to process these things. This is where you got to learn how to quiet the mind. Yes, it can be exhausting, and that's where you got to learn how to control your thoughts. And sometimes it just gets so exhausting, you just got to go out for a bike ride, go out for a walk, go to the beach, go to the mountains, go hiking. You need to create this balanced lifestyle for yourself where, yes, you have your nose in the books from time to time and reading the teachings of the Buddha. Yes, you're meditating. Yes, you're paying attention to your moral conduct, like right speech, right action, right livelihood. But you need to also know how to relax, go out and have fun, go hiking, spend time with your family, and these kinds of things too. You can't force a round peg through a square hole. So you're going to need to create this balanced lifestyle where you guys are, yes, training your mind, but you're also doing these things, but you're doing them now in a different way. Where before we might have got a lot of pleasure going to the bar or drinking alcohol and using drugs or going around and having sex with people or chasing after money or, posting things on Facebook about look how great and magnificent I am, where we used to get pleasure in those things, these cravings and this conceit and stuff like that. All that stuff is starting to fade away and the mind can kind of retract a bit. But now you have to come into your own where you start enjoying just spending time with people in a wholesome way and just having great, wonderful conversation that is polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. That you just enjoy going for a walk and looking at the birds and looking at the lake and going up the mountain and getting a little bit of exercise and just smiling at people and just driving down the road and even being stuck in traffic and just looking around and observing the people in traffic, just enjoying every little aspect of life. So all of you guys are experiencing these things and it's wonderful that you are. It can feel a bit miserable when you're experiencing these things. That's true. I'm sure, Jose, it kind of feels somewhat odd to kind of be retracting from your family, and maybe Mayuli, this feels a bit odd for you too, but your minds are starting to break through a little bit. And as you start breaking through, you'll start seeing more and more joy, more and more enjoyment, more and more fun coming through. So those of you guys that are experiencing these things, be sure you understand the 7 factors of enlightenment, because that's what's going to fine tune the mind. Because the reason why these things are occurring is because you're practicing the Eightfold Path to a certain degree. And now the mind's going to start swinging, and you need to bring in the 7 factors of enlightenment to kind of fine tune the mind and get it to the point where it's really performing optimally and it's really perfected. So this is great that you guys are experiencing this, although I know it can be somewhat troubling, it can be exhausting, and it can be sometimes even scared. But this is part of you letting go of your 5 aggregates and not clinging, and just having trust and confidence in the Buddha, have trust in the teachings and confidence in the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to get to enlightenment, and just keep pushing through, doing all the same things that you're doing now in order to get to this point with the Eightfold Path and meditation and everything else, but bring in the 7 factors of enlightenment to fine tune the mind a bit. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else, so we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 4. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Vibhav, and then we'll go to Keely after that.
This holy life is lived for the abandoning of existence. This world is burning, and by contact, it calls disease itself. By whatever mean it understands anything, it becomes otherwise than that. Becoming otherwise, the world is attached to becoming harmed by existence, and yet has excitement in that very existence. Where there is excitement, there is fear. What one fears is stressful. This holy life is lived for the abandoning of existence. Whatever ascetics and Brahmins say that liberation from existence is by the means of existence, all of them are not released from existence, I say. And whatever ascetics or Brahmins say that escape from existence is by means of non-existence, all of them have not escaped from existence, I say. But this stress comes into play in dependence on every gain of material possessions. With the ending of every craving desire, there is no stress coming into play. Look at this world, being afflicted with thick ignorance, unknowing of true reality, are unreleased from passion of what has come to be. All levels of existence, anywhere in any way, are impermanent, stressful, subject to change. Seeing this as it's come to be with right wisdom, one abandons craving for existence and doesn't have excitement and non-existence. From the total ending of craving comes fading and elimination without remainder, liberation, enlightenment. For the monk who is liberated through lack of craving desire, there is no further existence. He has conquered Mara, won the battle, having gone beyond existences, such.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, this is the Buddha actually having come out of meditation prior to this. If you go back and read the suttas, he was actually meditating, and he comes out of meditation and he basically declares the world's burning, that it's harmed by contact, meaning that when an individual being experiences contact through the six sense spaces, that it's experiencing this harm in one's own mind, because if there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, then there's going to be this discontentedness that is arising. And then an individual declares that there is a self. This is a disease, the way the Buddha looks at it. And this is where some people describe the Buddha like a doctor, that there's certain symptoms, he provides a solution or a remedy or a prescription. So he's describing the self, the idea that there is a self, he's describing it as a disease, that if anybody thinks of that this body or this mind is you and who you are, this is a disease of the self. The mind's clinging to existence. And the Buddha is ultimately helping you to be able to see here that how beings are essentially holding on to the world, and they become harmed through being in existence, but yet they excite in this very existence. Another way to think about this is you might hear people around you complaining about the world and how horrible the world is, but yet they're clinging to the world and wanting to keep coming back into the world over and over and over again, right? So this is where the Buddha is describing these kinds of things. And then here he's saying, okay, where there's excitement, meaning where there's conditional pleasant feelings, there's fear. And remember, this is independently verifiable. You can think about examples from your life that where you get excited about that new car, or you get excited about that new phone or that new laptop, and now there's fear. Oh my goodness, somebody's going to scratch my car. I need to park it all the way in the back of the parking lot so that nobody scratches it, because there's this fear. And now when there's this fear of somebody scratching my car, now I'm stressed, right? When you're inside the store and you're thinking about your car and that somebody might scratch your car, you might actually have this stress come into the mind. So this is where the Buddha is showing this cause and effect. Whereas if you allow the mind to crave and it gets what it wants and it gets these pleasant feelings of excitement, then you're going to have this fear come in. And now when this fear comes in, that's where you're going to experience the stress as well. So it's craving, desire, attachment that's producing all of these things. So this life that he's teaching, this path that he's teaching, is to abandon existence, meaning abandon existence in the cycle of rebirth. Once you get to enlightenment and die, the Buddha doesn't say what comes next. He leaves it as an undeclared teaching. But he does describe that once you get to enlightenment, you've escaped existing in the cycle of rebirth. But then he says, okay, if there's other people who are essentially saying that liberation comes from existence, like liberation from existence comes by existing in the world. This is what we were just talking about, of like taking a vow to come back into the world, and this is how you're going to get liberated. All of them are not released from existence, right? They haven't yet eliminated their clinging to existence because they think that they're going to get to enlightenment by existing in the world. And the Buddha is saying none of them are actually enlightened yet. And whatever individual says that escape from existence is by means of non-existence, all of them haven't escaped existence either. So he's saying if you think that liberation is going to come from existence, you haven't gotten to enlightenment yet. If you think that liberation is going to come from non-existence, you haven't gotten to enlightenment yet. And then there's this stress due to having material possessions. That's what the Buddha is describing here. But now, with the ending of all your cravings and desires, that longing, yearning, that's where there's no stress. You can actually eliminate the stress. And now he talks about, look at this world. Beings afflicted with this thick ignorance are unreleased from passion. This is craving, desire, attachment when he talks about passion. Because the mind lacks wisdom, it has this unknowing of true reality. The cravings continue to exist. The mind is unreleased from that, and the world is afflicted with this. And this is what you'll see all throughout the world. Just turn on the news walk down the street, you'll hear people arguing and fighting. Get on Facebook and see people arguing and being hostile and bitter with each other. You'll see this thick ignorance that they don't realize they're using things like wrong speech, wrong intention, they have wrong view. You'll see that there's this thick unknowing of true reality. And it's because then with that, there's going to be these cravings, desires, attachments. It's everywhere, right? So now the Buddha says all levels of existence anywhere in any way are impermanent, stressful, subject to change. So this is where he's saying essentially the 5 realms of existence, no matter what realm you're in, it's impermanent. Sometimes people think that the heavenly realm is a permanent existence, but it's actually impermanent. And you can see the Buddha describing that here. And then he goes on and he's explaining more and more essentially about elimination of craving, desire, attachment. And then he says, with right wisdom, one abandons craving for existence and does not have excitement in non-existence. Right wisdom is when you fully cultivate the path to enlightenment. You've gotten to final knowledge, where we talk about the Eightfold Path pretty much in detail and extensively. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're practicing the Tenfold Path. There's 2 extra steps that aren't taught. It's actually a result of having practiced all the other steps. There's right wisdom and there's right liberation. What right wisdom is when you fully cultivated the mind to have all the wisdom of the entire path to enlightenment. And when you've done this, you'll be able to talk about the path to enlightenment with ease. You'll know every last aspect of the path to enlightenment, inside and out. And you'll be experiencing right liberation, where your mind will no longer experience any discontent feelings for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So these are the 2 extra factors of the Tenfold Path that all enlightened beings are experiencing. And having cultivated right wisdom, fully practicing the path, because in order to cultivate right wisdom, it's not just intellectual, it's also the practice of the teachings too. That by cultivating right wisdom, one has abandoned any craving for existence, to be in this world, but they also don't have excitement for non-existence either. In other words, you're completely content and peaceful in the present moment. That you're not longing, yearning to stay in the world, but you're not excited to leave the world either. It's just like, okay, completely content in the present moment. And now for the total ending of craving comes fading and elimination without remainder. That's the mind experiencing enlightenment or liberation. And now the Buddha is saying, for one who's liberated, meaning that they don't have craving, desire, attachment, the mind's enlightened, there's no further existence in the cycle of rebirth. He's not talking about beyond that. He's just saying that there's no more existence in the cycle of rebirth. And then he says that you've conquered Mara, which is that formless being, which is interested in doing a lot of calamity and unwholesome things in the world. You've won the battle. This is that battle in your mind. For those of you guys that are experiencing those obsessive thoughts, the constant thinking, the constant cutting off, the kind of the shrinking back from your family and being unmotivated, this is the battle. The mind's at battle. You're at war inside your own mind. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you've won that battle. And the mind's completely peaceful and joyful. And now you've gone beyond existences, meaning that you're no longer in the cycle of rebirth. And when the Buddha ends a discourse with such, what he's saying is, so it is, or that's the way it is, essentially is what he's saying. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this discourse. This is volume 4, chapter 4. This holy life is lived for the abandoning of existence, right? It's not to come back into the world. It's to eliminate this existence in the cycle of rebirth. So Vibhav, I see a hand up. I don't know if that's from reading or if you have a question. You have a question? Okay, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you please clarify this non-existence here? It doesn't mean that, like, leaving the world, like it says here that, can you just go down a little bit, please?
Whenever the Buddha talks about the world, he's talking about the cycle of rebirth. So if you're escaping the world, if you're leaving the world, you're leaving out of the cycle of rebirth. That's what's happening when you get to enlightenment, that you've escaped that. And while you're alive and the mind is actually enlightened, you're outside of the cycle of rebirth, you're no longer experiencing this constant spinning. This is where, like in your life, when your mind's unenlightened, you can be oftentimes experiencing the same things over and over and over again, the broken relationships over and over and over again, the problem with your bosses over and over and over again. No matter what job you go to, you have the same problems with your bosses over and over and over again. And in the unenlightened state, with the lack of wisdom, we'll blame these things on other people. But by the time you've cultivated the mind, you're no longer stuck in this cycle of continuously being reborn over and over again, but you're also not experiencing these problems over and over and over again, because you know with wisdom that any kind of issues that you're having in life, it's coming from your own mind, and you just need to cultivate wisdom to overcome those challenges. So if you've escaped out of the cycle of rebirth, you're now no longer in the world, so to speak, that you're no longer in the cycle of rebirth. There is still an existence, that you're still in this human body. There's still a being that's existing in the world, but now you're doing that completely joyfully and peacefully.
Yes, I guess secondary question is that some ascetics and Brahmins believe that escape from existence is by means of non-existence.
Mm-hmm.
What does non-existence mean here? That basically that you're dying and then come back? Is that what this means, or they think that you'll basically be liberated by when you die? That's what this means here, or?
Yeah, non-existence is that people think in some cases that when you die, that you're completely done. There's no more existence whatsoever. Like you have just one life. And this isn't actually true.
Okay.
Yeah, this isn't actually true. Or some people think that when you get to enlightenment, that there's no more existence after that. But the Buddha never said that. He just left it as an undeclared teaching. So anybody who says that escape from the cycle of rebirth is through not existing any longer anywhere, then what the Buddha is saying is this person hasn't escaped existence yet, because they haven't fully cultivated their mind. They haven't fully accomplished right wisdom to fully understand the entire path to enlightenment, because they still think that it's through non-existence that they're going to escape existence. And that's like two opposite extremes. The mind needs to be able to get to the present moment where there's peacefulness and joy in the present moment.
So these are connected, right? So the philosophies that say that there's only one existence, and they say, okay, you have the most, have the most fun, or do all you can, because you only have one life, and you need to make the best out of it. Whatever way that is, right? That's they're also interconnected in a way.
Yeah. Some people think that just because they can't maybe remember their past lives at this point in time, they may think that they only have one life, but this is not true. And it's unfortunate that someone might think that way, but that's the way some people think. And what the Buddha is guiding you to be able to do through seeing this and through understanding dependent origination, you'll be able to understand that that's not true. Because all these chapters, they're leading up to volume 5, where you're ultimately going to be learning dependent origination. And all this is, I think when you get to dependent origination, a lot of this stuff starts really clicking for you, that you see the whole 12 interlinking steps that is keeping this whole problem of not only discontentedness, but the bigger problem, which is being stuck in the cycle of rebirth. It's just keeping that going on and on and on.
I have a secondary question, not teaching itself, but in the notes you say that Buddha basically was meditating for 7 days without a break. So this is like a continuous meditation that he did without food and water and everything.
Yeah, that's what it says in the Pali Canon. I wasn't there at that time to be able to know myself. So this is what the Pali Canon says, that he came out of meditation, and when he emerged, this is what he said.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Marcy, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. So one of the things that has been brought to my attention regarding the Buddha was the fact that he never defined what happens to an enlightened being once the mind separates from the body. And I myself, and teacher, I look for guidance to see if I'm understanding this correctly. For me, I kind of look at it this way, that I don't need an answer, or there's no craving for an answer to that, because I understand the peacefulness in the present moment. So whatever comes afterwards is just a bonus or whatever. There's no need to have that understanding. I understand the teachings now and the peacefulness and the contentness that comes from it. So that's where my mind resides. Is that a good or a beneficial way of understanding that?
Yep, and I think that's exactly why the Buddha left it as an undeclared teaching, because it is what it is. There's either going to be something next or not, and what you need to be able to get to is where you're completely peaceful and joyful and content in the present moment. And if there was something next, and he describes that, that's just one more craving that you have to eliminate. If there's not anything next, well, so be it. You're already peaceful and joyful now. So he doesn't declare what is or isn't next wisely, in my opinion, because it doesn't allow the mind to actually crave in any way what may or may not be next. Instead, you just focus on the present moment and getting to enlightenment now, so that the mind is peaceful and joyful now in the present moment without this promise of an afterlife.
Thank you, teacher.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like we have some more coming in here on YouTube. There's somebody saying something, and then here, Mayuli. You're welcome, Mayuli. Yes, you feel like you're at war with your mind. Yep, that's oftentimes what is being experienced. Just keep pushing through that. Don't shrink back from that struggle. Lots of good things happening there. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere, so we'll go to chapter 5. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, I didn't see the chapter 75 yet. Okay,
chapter
now
4.
it is.
Yeah.
With destruction of excitement and craving comes destruction of discontentedness. Monks, a monk sees as impermanent the I which is actually impermanent. This is his right will. Seeing rightly, he experiences a fading away of strong feelings. With the destruction of excitement comes destruction of craving. With the destruction of craving comes destruction of excitement. With the destruction of excitement and craving, the mind is said to be well liberated. Monks, a monk sees as impermanent the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, which is actually impermanent. Seeing rightly, he experiences a fading away of strong feelings. With the destruction of excitement and craving, the mind is said to be well liberated. The Buddha repeats the entire statement for the remaining internal sense bases of the ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and the 6 external sense bases of forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, mental objects. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So the Buddha here is focusing in on understanding right view. If you guys remember when I helped you to get established in right view, one of the first things that I taught you was the universal truth of impermanence, which is part of those 3 universal truths, because you need to understand the universal truth of impermanence in order to get established in right view. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you here, that everything that I've put together in our programs has been with the thought of exactly what you need to be learning at any given time. So even though you didn't see this early on in your journey, your teacher had, and that's why my program that I'm sharing that is helping you to get to enlightenment is structured the way it is, because this is what the Buddha laid out as what's needed in order to be able to get to enlightenment. That you need to be able to see these 6 sense bases as impermanent. The eye, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. Because if the mind thinks that these things are permanent, then you're going to long and yearn, and you're going to try to cling to any kind of contact that you're experiencing through these things. But when you start understanding that these things are impermanent, and any contact coming through that is impermanent, when you understand that these pleasant feelings are impermanent and they ultimately are going to fade away and leave you feeling the painful feelings, then it's much easier to commit to eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments. But if you didn't understand this, then the mind wouldn't be able to do that. So that's why the Buddha is making this very clear. So the more that you see clearly, seeing rightly, he experiences fading away of strong feelings. This is where the strong feelings fade away, and it can kind of have you feeling icky and awkward for a period of time before the mind kind of brightens up. Because as you're letting go of those cravings, where the mind used to get its pleasant feelings, the mind hasn't yet learned how to enjoy something without craving, desire, attachment. So when you're no longer getting those pleasant feelings because of the craving, desire, attachment, your mind can kind of feel icky for quite a while because it hasn't learned yet how to enjoy something without craving and clinging. So this is the process that the mind has to go through, arising the wisdom of how to enjoy life without craving and clinging. And having destroyed this conditional pleasant feelings of excitement, that's where the mind is eliminating craving, and then the mind is getting more and more liberated. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll go to the next chapter. And it looks like we've got some people volunteering. I'll just take the first one. Looks like Marcy, and then Pat, you'll be next after that.
Thank you, Teacher David. With the elimination of excitement comes the complete destruction of discontentedness. Puna. There are forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, excitement is eliminated in him. With the elimination of excitement, puna, there is the elimination of discontentedness, I say. There are, puna, sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavor recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, excitement is eliminated in him. With the elimination of excitement, puna, there is the elimination of discontentedness, I say.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So you guys have heard me share before how you need to be able to see these conditioned pleasant feelings as just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. And the more that you see that those conditioned pleasant feelings are going to ultimately lead to painful feelings, you understand to cut off the conditioned pleasant feelings so that your mind can then come to the middle where you can enjoy life and have enjoyment, but there isn't any conditional enjoyment, that you can just enjoy everything. But as long as you allow your mind to welcome in these agreeable and pleasing and lovely and desirable things, these sensually enticing things, and you seek excitement in them, as long as you keep doing that, your mind's going to keep getting excitement. But if you don't welcome these things and you don't remain holding on to them, then the mind won't experience the conditional pleasant feelings. Therefore, you're not going to experience the conditional painful feelings. So that's why the Buddha is saying with the elimination of excitement, those conditional pleasant feelings, there is the elimination of discontentedness, I say. So you need to be able to see that those pleasant feelings are just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. And it can sound kind of odd because we're so used to chasing after pleasant feelings and fulfilling our cravings, desires, attachments. But when you see this temporary pleasure as being unfulfilling and unsatisfying because it's only temporary, and as long as you hold on to the temporary pleasant feelings, you're not going to be able to get to the permanent happiness. So if you hold on to this temporary happiness, you can't get to the permanent happiness. So you need to be able to see that. And then the more you knock down this conditional excitement and conditional pleasant feelings where you can only be happy when these conditions are met, then when you get rid of all of that, now you can just be happy all the time. Okay, so let me know what questions you guys have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So it looks like Pat's up for this next one. This is chapter 7. Oops, here we go. And I think we've studied this in one of the recent volumes, but we'll just go ahead and study it again. Go ahead, Pat.
Mindfulness directed to the body, a strong post for mind. One dwells without having set up mindfulness of the body. Suppose, monks, a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds and tie them by a strong rope. He would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Having done so, he would tie the ropes together with a knot in the middle and release them. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, "Let me enter an anthill." The crocodile would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter the water." The bird would pull another way, thinking, "Let me fly up into the sky." The dog would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a village." The jackal would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a charnel ground." The monkey would pull another way, thinking, "Let me enter a forest." Now, when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would be dominated by the one among them that was the strongest. They would submit to it and come under its control. So too, monks, when a monk has not developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye pulls in the direction of agreeable forms, and disagreeable forms are repulsive. The ear pulls in the direction of agreeable sounds, and disagreeable sounds are repulsive. The nose pulls in the direction of agreeable odors, and disagreeable odors are repulsive. The tongue pulls in the direction of agreeable flavors, and disagreeable flavors are repulsive. The body pulls in the direction of agreeable physical objects, and disagreeable physical objects are repulsive. The mind pulls in the direction of agreeable mental objects, and disagreeable mental objects are repulsive. It is in such a way that there is non-restraint.
Okay, there's more here, but let me just explain this one. I'll kind of have you pick up here in a moment, Pat. So what the Buddha is describing is these 6 animals, which are representing the 6 sense bases: the eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind, and that they're all pulling in all these different opposite directions. And you tie a rope around their neck, and then you tie a knot in the middle. And now, as they tug and pull, whichever one is the strongest and the other ones get tired, they're going to pull in that direction. So if the crocodile is the strongest, it's going to pull all the other animals in that direction because they're tied together at a knot. And the Buddha is describing this in the same way as your 6 sense bases, that whichever one is the strongest, that you have craving coming through, that your mind's going to pull in that direction, right? So say you're at the mall and you see a beautiful woman or a handsome man. You smell some bread being cooked in the food court. You hear some music coming out of one of the stores playing some great music. Whatever is the strongest sense base and whichever craving you have that is the strongest, it's going to pull in that direction because there's no restraint. You might pull into the store to listen to the music and have a great time. Like, wow, look at me. I'm having such a great time showing off in front of everyone my new dance moves. Or maybe there's a longing, yearning for food and you go eat this food. It's not just eating the food that is the problem. It's the longing, yearning for it. Or you might see this beautiful or handsome person and your eyes pulling towards that. So whatever one is the strongest craving, the mind's going to pull in that direction. And in this way, the Buddha is saying there is no restraint. But now he's going to describe the next thing. So I'll let you pick it up from here, Pat.
One resides having set up mindfulness of the body. Suppose, monks, a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds, and tie them by a strong rope. He would catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey, and tie each by a strong rope. Having done so, he would bind them to a strong post or pillar. Then those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would pull each other in direction of its own feeding grounds and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, let me enter an anthill. The crocodile would pull another way, thinking, let me enter the water. The bird would pull another way, thinking, let me fly up into the sky. The dog would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a village. The jackal would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a charnel ground. The monkey would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a forest. Now, when these 6 animals become worn out and fatigued, they would stand close to the post or pillar. They would sit down there. They would lie down there. So too, monks, when a monk has developed and cultivated mindfulness directed to the body, the eye does not pull in the direction of agreeable forms, nor are disagreeable forms repulsive. The ear does not pull in the direction of agreeable sounds, nor are disagreeable sounds repulsive. The nose does not pull in the direction of agreeable odors, nor are disagreeable odors repulsive. The tongue does not pull in the direction of agreeable flavors, nor are disagreeable flavors repulsive. The body does not pull in the direction of agreeable physical objects, nor are disagreeable physical objects repulsive. The mind does not pull in the direction of agreeable mental objects, nor are disagreeable mental objects repulsive. It is in such a way that there is restraint. A strong post or pillar, this, monks, is a designation for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body. Make it our vehicle, make it our basis, stabilize it, exercise ourselves and fully perfect it. Thus should you train yourselves.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So in this previous part of the discourse, the Buddha is saying that this individual doesn't have mindfulness of the bodily sensations that are the preliminary early warning system alerting you that discontentedness is about to arise. This individual doesn't have this mindfulness. So therefore, when it experiences agreeable contact through the six sense bases, the mind is pulling towards that. Or when you experience disagreeable contact through the six sense bases, the mind is repulsed and pushing this away. This is what's happening because there's no restraint. And because there's no restraint, that there's no mindfulness. The mindfulness is the precursor to restraint. You can't restrain your mind if you're not aware of what's going on in your mind. If you see your mind longing, yearning, and pulling with your mindfulness, then you can have restraint. Or if you see your mind pushing things away, you can have restraint. But if you don't have mindfulness and awareness of those early warning system of the bodily sensations, you're not going to be able to do that. But down here, he's describing that now, instead of these six sense bases just pulling in all these opposite directions where you get exhausted, instead you have this post or this pillar, this mindfulness, this awareness of mind. And now when you see the mind pulling, you yank it back. That's what's happening to these animals, that because they're binded to this post or pillar, as they pull and yank, they get yanked back and yanked back and yanked back, and now they sit down by that post or pillar. And they're no longer favoring or opposing. There's no longer this agreeable or disagreeable contact, that you're not chasing after things that are agreeable and you're not repulsed by disagreeable things. Instead, it's just contact. That's all it is. There was a student talking to me today about jackhammering going on at their house and fireworks and things like this, and how their mind in the past was maybe disturbed by this, but now they could sleep right through it. This is something that you can experience, that you're no longer having this favoring and opposing or this agreeable and disagreeable contact, that it's just contact. And this is where the mind's becoming more and more liberated. And you would have had to get to this through cultivating your awareness of mind or your mindfulness. And now with your awareness of mind, when you see the mind pulling, you yank it back. Or when you see the mind is repulsed by something, you might actually have to put the mind in that situation. So where you see your mind is attached to something and it's craving and longing, yearning, it's really wanting that thing, you're going to need to distance yourself from that and train your mind to let it go. Where you see that you're repulsed by something and you're pushing it away, you're going to need to put your mind in that situation in order to train your mind to be comfortable with that. So I'll give you an example. Say that you really, really like chocolate cake, and man, you can't get enough chocolate cake. Well, in this situation, you're going to have to distance your mind from that for probably a few months where you're not having any chocolate cake. And now you train your mind to eliminate that craving, desire, attachment. But if you're repulsed by durian fruit, you're going to need to actually eat some durian fruit occasionally and train your mind to just see it as food to nourish the body until you get over the odor and the taste and the consistency on the tongue and all these other things. So this is what you're going to need to do in order to build the mind to get to the point where it doesn't have this favoring and opposing. It's just contact. And now you can restrain your mind in these situations. And in this way, the Buddha is describing mindfulness as this post or pillar that as the mind keeps pulling in all these different opposite directions, you use your mindfulness to yank it back and yank it back and yank it back. And this is what's ultimately going to help help you to be able to get to enlightenment. And that's why he's saying this is how you should train. Be sure that you develop this mindfulness directed to the body, meaning that you're aware of those bodily sensations, that early warning system before the mind experiences the conditioned feeling. There's going to be some bodily sensations, either with pleasant feelings, you might notice tingling across the shoulders, up the back of the neck and over the head, or with the painful feelings, you might notice tightening in the chest, tightening in the throat, heat in the face, pressure in the skull, or any number of other things that could be occurring. This is the early warning system that you need to develop mindfulness or awareness of mind of, so that you can cut that off and let it go, not allowing the mind to get the conditioned feeling, that you're rewiring the mind. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. This is chapter 7. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 8. We've also studied this one recently too. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Samantha. And then we'll go to Keely after that.
The simile of the tortoise. Monks, in the past, a tortoise was searching for food along the bank of a river one evening. On that same evening, a jackal was also searching for food along the bank of that same river. When the tortoise saw the jackal in the distance searching for food, it drew its limbs and neck inside its shell and passed the time, keeping still and silent. The jackal had also seen the tortoise in the distance searching for food, so he approached and waited close by, thinking, when this tortoise extends one or another of its limbs or its neck, I will grab it right on the spot, pull it out, and eat it. But because the tortoise did not extend any of its limbs or its neck, the jackal, failing to gain access to it, lost interest in it and departed. So too, monks, Mara, the evil one, is constantly and continually waiting close by you, thinking, perhaps I will gain access to him through the eye or through the ear or through the nose or through the tongue or through the body or through the mind. Therefore, monks, reside guarding the doors of the 6 sense spaces. Having seen a form with the eye, having heard a sound with the ear, having smelt an odor with the nose, having tasted a flavor with the tongue, having touched a physical object with the body, having recognized a mental object with the mind, do not grasp its signs and features. Since, if you leave the eye sense base unguarded, the ear sense base unguarded, the nose sense base unguarded, the tongue sense base unguarded, the body sense base unguarded, the mind sense base unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of craving and displeasure might invade you. Practice the way of its restraint. Guard the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, the body sense base, the mind sense base. Undertake the restraint of the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, the body sense base, and the mind sense base. When monks, you reside guarding the doors of the six sense bases, Mara, the evil one, failing to gain access to you, will lose interest in you and depart, just as the jackal departed from the tortoise. Drawing in the mind's thoughts, as a tortoise draws its limbs into its shell, independent, not harassing others, fully extinguished. A monk would not blame anyone.
Yes, thank you, Samantha. So this is another discourse about mindfulness, because mindfulness is so important. That's where you'll see mindfulness coming up in the teachings of the Buddha a lot, because without mindfulness, you're not going to make any progress on the path to enlightenment. You need to have awareness of the mind. And whenever you see the mind longing and yearning, you would like to protect the mind by cutting that off and letting it go. So whenever the Buddha talks about being guarded, he's talking about the mindfulness. It's almost like a security guard watching over the mind. And when your mind is unguarded, you're not using your mindfulness. You can be waking up in the morning, kind of like not really having your mindfulness established yet, and some thoughts can come into your mind. Or you can be dozing off at night and you don't have your mindfulness tuned in, and you can have thoughts that obsess the mind. So you would like to practice this mindfulness all the time. And while it can be exhausting as you're first getting this up and running and getting it going, ultimately your mindfulness will be like that virus scanner that's just always running. It's almost on autopilot. It's just always there. And that's what you would ultimately like to get to. Because what the Buddha is describing here is that Mara, this unwholesome being that is interested in causing calamity is going to try to get access to you through one of your sense bases, because this being and beings working on this being's behalf knows that if they can tempt you through one of your sense bases, then you'll take an action that's going to make a decision to go down this path of craving, desire, attachment. So you would like to guard the mind so that whenever you see the mind longing, yearning, you cut that off, you restrain it, you pull it back. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Marcy, you might have a question.
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. I'm glad you brought this up. The mindfulness at bedtime. So how I have been trying to go to sleep is obviously I have my routine. I will do my meditation. And then when it's time to sleep, I usually close my eyes and I will tell the mind, okay, it's time to sleep. But how do you maintain mindfulness as you are falling to sleep? I don't know if I'm asking that correctly. Like how the stages of mindfulness going to bed.
Yeah, so as you're falling asleep, you just watch over the mind. You just make sure you're attentive to the mind, that if there's any unwholesome thought that comes in, you cut it off and let it go. You don't allow it to be there. Otherwise, the mind is complacent. So you don't have to be like attentive and alert. You just have to have some awareness of the mind, some general awareness of what's going on in the mind as you're laying there. And if you're focused on the breath, which a lot of times is a nice way to fall asleep, even though you've already had your meditation session and that's done and over with, as you fall asleep, you can actually just focus on the breath. And this can be a great way to fall asleep because the mind is just focusing on the breath. You don't consider it one of your 2 or 3 meditation sessions, but this way it kind of inhibits any kind of unwholesome thoughts from coming into the mind.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. So I think Keely was volunteering, so we've got this next one, chapter 9. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, I'm still waiting for the words. Okay, here it goes. The simile of the boil of oil. Monks, suppose that on hearing the most beautiful girl of the land, the most beautiful girl of the land, a great crowd of people would assemble. Now that most beautiful girl of the land would dance exquisitely and sing exquisitely. On hearing the most beautiful girl of the land is dancing, the most beautiful girl of the land is singing, an even larger crowd of people would assemble. Then a man would come along, aspiring to live, not aspiring to die, aspiring for peacefulness, uninterested in discontentedness. Someone would say to him, "Good man, you must carry around this bowl of oil filled to the brim between the crowd and the most beautiful girl of the land. A man with a drawn sword will be following right behind you, and wherever you spill even a little of it, right there he will cut off your head. What do you think, monks? Would that man stop attending to that bowl of oil and out of negligence turn his attention outward? No, venerable sir, I have made up this simile, monks, in order to convey a meaning. This here is the meaning. The bowl of oil filled to the brim. This is our destination for mindfulness directed to the body. Therefore, monks, you should train yourself thus. We will develop and cultivate mindfulness directed to the body. Make it our vehicle, make it our basis, stabilize it, exercise ourselves in it, and fully perfect it. Thus, monks, should you train out yourselves. Monks, those who do not take part in mindfulness directed to the body do not take part in the deafness, enlightenment. Those who take part in mindfulness directed to the body, they take part in the deafness. Monks, those who are unattentive about mindfulness directed to the body are unattentive about the deafness. Those who are attentive about mindfulness directed to the body are attentive about the deathless enlightenment. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So the Buddha gives this great simile in order to help you understand that if you are not practicing mindfulness to become aware of those bodily sensations, you're not going to get to enlightenment. That's what he's saying. That's a vital component of your journey to enlightenment. But on the contrary, if you do develop your mindfulness to the point where you can observe those bodily sensations, that early warning system, and cut off and let go of any discontentedness arising as a bodily sensation, then you're making your way to enlightenment. And this is what I've been sharing with you guys with right mindfulness, that essentially your mind's going to be telling you, hey, I'm about to get a conditioned feeling here. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling here. I'm about to get a conditioned feeling. And you're like, nope, I'm not going to let you do that. Sorry. Whereas if you allow the mind to get that conditioned feeling, your mind's just going to stay wired that way. And between now and enlightenment, you will get some conditioned feelings, but more and more you'd like to cut it off and cut it off and cut it off and cut it off. And each time you do that, yes, it can be exhausting, it can be tiresome, but each time you do that, that's restraining the mind and pulling the mind back and shaving away your craving, desire, attachment. It's like trimming this wild bush until you completely uproot it. And this simile is a great example that the Buddha is saying that if you were carrying this bowl of water and on one side you got the most beautiful being in the world who's going to be dancing and singing, and you've got a crowd on the other side, you're carrying this bowl of oil that is filled to the brim, and someone behind you is going to cut off your head if you drop even one little drop. Would you turn your mind outwards and look to the most beautiful girl of the land or the crowd? No, you're going to pay a lot of attention to that oil, right? And that's what the Buddha is saying, is pay a lot of attention to your mindfulness, because it's a life or death situation, right? Like you can either experience enlightenment and escape this whole cycle of rebirth, or you can just keep coming back and doing it over and over and over again. So by you paying attention to that oil or to your mindfulness and developing that to be aware of the bodily sensations, you can be attentive and cut that off and let that go. Okay, let me know what questions you guys have here. Okay, it looks like we have a question coming in here from Charlotte. When I notice that I'm getting attached to a thought or something physical things, at this stage I can only acknowledge it and tell myself to let it go, but my mind is still thinking about it. It's almost like a internal fight. How should I improve that? Yes, this is true that the mind can feel like it's at a war with itself. I'm not sure how you're meditating right now, Charlotte. It sounds like you went to some retreats here in Chiang Mai and maybe some other places as well. Oftentimes they're not teaching you breathing mindfulness meditation in the way that the Buddha taught. If you were taught to do counting or labeling or looking at your thoughts, indulging in your thoughts, things like this during the meditation, this is going to hinder you from being able to develop the quality that the Buddha is guiding you to be able to cultivate, which is to be able to cut off and let go. So if you're not able to do that right now, it might mean that your meditation practice isn't what it needs to be. Whereas if you're counting or you're looking at your thoughts, labeling your thoughts, noting your thoughts, looking at your feelings, this is a very common thing. Even some people here, they teach you to say pu to, pu to. This is all occupying the mind, and it's not really allowing the mind to actually let go. So that's why you would like to focus on the breath, and whenever the mind moves off the breath, to cut that off and let it go and bring the mind back to the breath. So if you're not currently doing that, you would like to start building that type of meditation practice. And then in day-to-day life, more and more you're going to have mindfulness and awareness of the bodily sensations. That is the early warning system before the mind experiences discontentedness, and then you can cut off and let go at the bodily sensations, not allowing the mind to get the conditioned feeling. So that would be my feedback right now without knowing how your meditation practice is, but I just suspect that you might not be meditating in the way that the Buddha taught. Okay, and by the way, you can share more either here or since you're going to be coming to the temple, it sounds like soon, we can talk there as well. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Or there's Marcy, you have a question?
I was just raising to read next if no one else is willing to.
Okay, sure. Here we go. This is one that we've also studied recently, but go ahead.
Great fruit and benefit of breathing mindfulness meditation. Aranapasati. Monks, mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit and benefit. And how, monks, is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and benefit? Here, monks, a monk, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or an empty hut, sits down, having folding his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and set up mindfulness in front of him. Just mindful, he breathes in, mindful, he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows I breathe in long, or breathing out long, he knows I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows I breathe in short, or breathing out short, he knows I breathe out short. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body. I breathe in, I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the whole body. I will breathe out. He trains thus, calming the bodily sensations. I will breathe in. He trains thus, calming the bodily sensations. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing joy. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing joy. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing peacefulness. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mental activity. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mental activity. I will breathe out. He trains thus, calming the mental activity. I will breathe in. He trains thus, calming the mental activity. I will breathe out. He trains thus, experiencing the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, experiencing the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, gladdening in the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, gladdening in the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, concentrating the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, concentrating the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, liberating the mind. I will breathe in. He trains thus, liberating the mind. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on impermanence. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on fading away. I breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on elimination. I will breathe out. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go. I will breathe in. He trains thus, reflecting on letting go. I will breathe out. It is, monks, when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated in this way, that it is of great fruit and benefit. When, monks, breathing of mindfulness has been developed and cultivated in this way, one of two fruits may be predicted: either final knowledge in this very life, or, if there is residual of cleaning, the state of a non-returner.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So this is the detailed instructions from the Buddha of how to do breathing mindfulness meditation. And he talks in other discourses about cutting off and letting go. Here, he's talking about just bringing the mind back to the breath, bringing the mind back to the breath. He's giving you the step-by-step, but you don't need to actually remember this when you're actually meditating. When you're first starting to meditate, you might need to remember a few of these things, but it's kind of like when you were learning to brush your teeth, your parents had to teach you every little step. And you had to be really conscious to stroke in and out on each sides of your teeth, where now you just and you do it so easily without even thinking about it. And that's what you need to be able to do with the teachings of the Buddha, that if you've been learning how to meditate in the way that I guide students through the guidance, that you've been learning how to meditate in this way. And I've walked you through this before and showing you how it's helping you to develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But each time what the Buddha is teaching you is to bring the mind back to the breath. So we've explored this recently, and you'll see this show up in a couple other places. I'm going to open up to see if you guys have any questions on any aspect of breathing mindfulness meditation. I suspect you guys are practicing it quite a bit by now, but there might be some new students somewhere on one of our live streams or something that isn't familiar with the Buddhist teachings on breathing mindfulness meditation, because this is a technique that you're going to need to learn and cultivate and build up to 2 or 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more, because this is what's going to help you to build your mindfulness. The last several discourses, we've been talking about awareness of mind and developing awareness of the bodily sensations and cutting off and letting go and restraining the mind. Well, this is the way that you're going to be able to do that. That's why this discourse is in this location of the book series, that the first few chapters that we've been reading is helping you to understand the importance of mindfulness. And now this is the tool or technique that's going to help you to cultivate it. And then after you've been doing your breathing mindfulness meditations in your day-to-day life, you need to be practicing awareness of the mind, and more specifically, the 4 foundations of mindfulness of being aware of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular discourse. Okay, you're welcome, Charlotte. Pleased to help you. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question?
I guess I had just not on the this chapter itself, but just kind of trying to connect it back to the 7 days that Buddha meditated.
Mm-hmm.
And so looks like it's possible to kind of do like extended meditation for a long period of time without needing food and water. So can you just maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's what the Buddha did at that particular point in time, but that's not what you have to do in order to get to enlightenment. By that point, he was already enlightened, so you don't need to actually meditate for extended periods of time like that in order to get to enlightenment. You can train your mind with 2 to 3 sessions per day for 30 minutes or more. If you decide to do extended sessions beyond 30 minutes, it's okay, but you can see that as a household practitioner, having anything longer than that, it can really put you in a situation where you're not able to live a really balanced life, because you're going to need to spend time with your friends and your family and your work and your personal life and things that you need to do for yourself, and spending time alone. So if you spend an exorbitant amount of time meditating, like hours upon hours, it's going to take you away from all the other activities that you need to live a balanced life. Remember, the Buddha was an ascetic. He lived off of the donations of people around him. So he could go off and meditate for 7 days, and he still had food, he still had clothing, he still had shelter when he walked away from that. Whereas if you went away and did nothing for 7 days, you would probably have a lot of challenges in your personal and professional life. So don't feel like that's something that you have to do, but that's something that is described that the Buddha did do, but this was after his enlightenment.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, Marcy.
Sure, Teacher David. So there, I have been able to establish a livelihood where I have time on one of the days on the weekends where I can just meditate for as long as I want. It's not that you can't do that. It's just that if you have the time and it's not going to interfere with the balance of life, you're okay to meditate for as long as you would like, correct?
Yeah, if you would like to meditate for longer, feel free, but just don't feel like you have to. Sometimes people go to these retreats and they're meditating for 10, 12 hours a day, and they think that that's what they need to be doing. And, this is like the mind swings, like you go to retreat, people are meditating 10, 12 hours a day. They're living in this perfect conditions where everybody's silent and quiet. Nobody's really interacting. And then their mind gets to a certain state. But then when they go out into the world, it's like, whoa, the world hits them and it's hard to really function. And this is because the mind's swinging, that when you're in the world, you're wide open. And then when you go away to retreat, everybody's quiet and silent and meditating for 10 or 12 hours, that the mind hasn't really developed this way to integrate the teachings on a day-to-day basis where you're regularly meditating and you're regularly practicing the teachings. And that's what you would like to be able to do. So don't feel like you have to meditate for extended periods of time, but if you'd like to, there's no harm in it. You would just like to be sure you're living a balanced life and you're attending to all the other responsibilities and things that you need to take care of.
Yeah, because sometimes I find myself where I have constructed my week and have done everything that all my to-do lists I have done, and it's either watch TV for a few hours, or take this time to just do some long-term meditating, and I usually most of the time choose to just sit and meditate. But I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't like overdoing it. I don't even know if you could overdo meditating, but
you can. There is such thing as too much of a good thing, right? Like the mind can almost implode on itself. I've had students that experienced this when they were meditating too much too early in their practice. So you would like to balance things out, and if you would like to meditate for those longer periods of time, wonderful, go for it. But just don't feel like that's what you have to do. You would like to keep with your consistency. The frequency is actually more important than duration. That's what you're going to see, that if you're meditating for, once a day for an hour, that's not going to be nearly as impactful as twice a day for 30 minutes, 30 minutes each time. That's going to be much more impactful because of the frequency, and you'll be able to see this in your practice.
All right. Thank you very much, teacher.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, looks like Mayu Lee is saying, I understand that the Buddha ate one meal a day. What time or when in the day did he eat that one meal? He would always eat prior to midday, which was noon for us. And the reason why he ate only once a day is because this doesn't allow the mind to make a decision of when to eat. That if you got some bad news at 4 p.m. and the mind wants to turn to that big tub of ice cream or that big piece of cheesecake in the refrigerator to get your pleasant feelings because the mind's craving, if you've been on this practice of just eating once a day, then your mind doesn't get the opportunity to do that you restrain the mind. That's not what you have to do in order to get to enlightenment, eat once a day, but you do need to learn to eat in moderation where you're not gorging yourself, and you need to learn to not eat based on emotion. So if you see your mind going towards food based on emotions, that it's trying to get to those pleasant feelings based on food, then restrain it and pull it back. Or if you see you're gorging and eating a lot of food, you would like to restrain the mind on that as well. If you'd like to eat once a day, you can, but oftentimes for a household practitioner, our caloric needs, or our needs of the number of calories that we need, is much higher than just once a day, particularly with you having kids and working, and I think you work out too. I know you go skiing, Mayuli, and do things like this. Eating once a day could really deplete the body of what it needs, and it could actually create an environment that isn't conducive for this body or this mind. So don't feel like you have to eat once a day. If you like to do that occasionally, especially if you're going to be home and you're not out and about and doing things, if you'd like to do that for like a week or two, this can help the mind. If you're doing it just for one day a week, this doesn't really have the impact. But if you're doing it for kind of like a 7-day period or a 14-day period, this can be helpful. But you got to make sure that you're not doing a lot of physical activity, because you can feel really depleted during that period of time. And that's not going to probably be something that you do long term. So that's why the practice that you're trying to create is you're looking to create a practice that is sustainable on a consistent, ongoing basis. And for an ordained practitioner who doesn't really have a lot of physical activity, eating once a day could actually be fine. And some people think that during the lifetime of the Buddha, the calories that, say, a broccoli had was much higher than the same calories that we experience today. So eating the same quantity of food, the Buddha might have been getting more calories during that period of time because the soil was more pure, the water was more pure, the air was more pure. People think that maybe there was higher calories during that period of time. So we don't necessarily know that, but nonetheless, you need to learn to eat in moderation and not eat based in emotion. And eating once a day can help you to create that, but there's other ways to do that as well, where you can get a meal plan, where you just eat, whatever prescribed meals are given to you. Or you could eat at a set time every day. Or you could just observe the mind with your mindfulness. And whenever you see it going towards food based in maybe painful feelings that you're having, and the mind's trying to get back to something pleasant, you can say, no, I'm not going to let you do that, and restrain the mind and take it in another direction. And then eat smaller portions. I don't know what your portions are like now. I know you grew up in Laos, so you probably had smaller portions there, but now you live in the USA, so the portions there are typically a lot bigger, so you need to kind of pay attention to that as well, so you're not giving the body a whole lot of work to digest the food. Okay, so let me see. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So I'm just going to end our class here by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn and practice these teachings and all the work you're doing outside of class to prepare for the classes. If you're new to the program and you'd like to get the access to these books, you can go to buddhadailywisdom.com and you can download them for free from there, and you'll be able to get access to them. And then you can read them either before class or after class, so that way you can get the most benefit out of our time together. Next week, we're going to be in chapters 11 through 20, so you can read those either before class or after class. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be teaching the 4 stages of enlightenment in the 10 fetters. So if you'd like to join for this class, either 9 a.m. or 9 p.m., you're welcome to do that through our live streams, through our Zoom session, or at the temple at 9 a.m. I teach there, and at 9 p.m. I teach exclusively online. So perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Be well and take care, and perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.